test. Does anyone in Keysville have any questions about what we're going to do for the test? Keysville people only. Can't even force them to ask me anything, Tom.
No. I don't know. If I wasn't in the interview next Tuesday, I'd just go in there and throw a firecracker at them when I walk past them in the hallway. Maybe that'd help.
Well, we'll just have to, give them a pass and not worry about it. But Southside, anybody, you guys greatly outnumber the rest of us. So, any questions about the study guide? The study guide is just a list of terms that are things that we have spent about the last 7 or 8, 9 weeks talking about. So glance over that, and if you've got any questions because of the change in the date, you'll have a little more of an opportunity to question us. But it should be very straightforward. It's going to be 50 fill in the blank questions. And you shouldn't have any issues with it as long as you're familiar with the terms that are in that study guide.
Okay.
Okay?
Okay, sounds good. Cool beans.
Well, I hope it's good. I want it to be. But this like we were said initially, this unit that we've just finished going through talks about the basic information that we need to begin to talk about the unit 2, which is plant structure, plant chemistry, plant growth and development, genetics, and the biodiversity and processes. So, the chapter 6 is where we're going to start today. I thought we'd spend a little more time talking about the test, but apparently y'all don't feel like there's a need, so we'll just move on. As we talk about the structure of higher plants, we again find ourselves talking about a whole lot of terminology. Terminology in as far as the plants themselves, we talk about terminology for plant cells and tissues and organs. And then we're going to spend some time talking about the functions of those cells, tissues, and organs. As we begin to talk about this, we are concerned about the plant from the point that it begins the germination until it reaches its maturity or full size. And in that, we're going to talk about the external form of the plant. And when we talk about the external form, we're talking about the morphology. That's the external shape and structures of the plant. That's the morphology. That means the shape, the study of the shape. Talk about the histology, which is the microscopic features, or the internal portion of the. Tom, we got an awful lot of background noise. Sound like somebody breathing in a mic. I don't know what it is.
Is that better?
I think so. I think that's a little better. As we talk about the histology, that gets into the internal structure of leaves and stems and the various components and the way they function to facilitate the functions of a plant. The plants that we're concerned about are divided into 2 main classifications. We talk about gymnosperms, which are primarily represented by narrow-leafed evergreen trees. And an example of a gymnosperm is going to be a pine tree. It's a narrow-leafed evergreen tree, so it's a gymnosperm. The other group that we talk about are angiosperms, and they are generally broad-leafed flowering plants. So, you know, an example of an angiosperm would be a bean plant, or a rose bush would be an. They're both broadleafs and they produce flowers. Now, when we're talking about angiosperms, we're going to divide that again into two additional subclasses. And the subclasses of angiosperms that we talk about, the first one is listed as a monocot, a monocotyledon. And if you're not familiar with the term monocotyledon, this is like a lot of the terms that are involved with plant science. If you break it down, break it apart, you can actually define that term by using itself. Mono means one, and a cotyledon is a seed leaf. So if we're talking about a monocotyledon, and we quite often shorten that to monocot. What's an example of a monocot?
Corn.
Corn, exactly. It has a single seed leaf. Okay.
Do you ever shorten just monocot?
Go ahead. Do what?
Do you ever just shorten the term to monocot, like monocot?
Yeah, we do that quite often.
Okay.
But as we are, initially talking about it, we want to make sure everybody understands. That's where monocot comes from, the monocotyledon. As opposed to monocotyledon, the other one is going to be a dicotyledon or a dicot. So if a monocot is a single seed leaf, what's going to be a dicot?
When you have multiple, even though it says di, normally isn't it 3 seeds in a leaf? 3 seeds?
It generally refers to, when we're speaking of this, we're talking about in the initial seed phase. So when we're talking about a dicotyledon, it has 2 seed leaves when it's germinating.
Right.
A bean is a good example. We corn for a monocot. A lima bean is an example of a dicot, because as it begins to germinate, you've got 2 seed leaves.
Right.
So that's what we're looking at, a monocot versus a dicot. And they're essential definitions as we move through this next section. When we look at the life cycle of a corn plant or a monocot, that you plant the seed, a single corn seed is put into moist soil, and it imbibes. That means that it absorbs water from the soil, and it will begin to expand. And as it does that, the germination process is initiated, and it will begin to emerge what we call a radicle, which is the primary root. It's the first thing that occurs in the germination process of a monocot. That primary root emerges, and then shortly after that, you begin to get a plumule, which is the primary shoot. You got the root going down, you got a shoot coming up, and both of these structures will enlarge or begin to expand and begin the development of the germination of a corn plant. The radicle grows upward through the corzella, which develops the primary root. and then it begins to form secondary roots as they branch. And as we talk about this root formation, as these roots begin to grow, as they mature, you begin to get what we call adventitious roots, or they're the more fibrous roots that move outward. We were talking about the fibrous root system that we had under my grapevines last week, but in the root system of corn plant, the roots grow downward and then they grow outward, and it produces what we call adventitious roots. Now, sometimes these adventitious roots will come out above the soil and then move down, grow down into the soil. And those are primarily done to anchor or support that vertical structure that we're going to view as a stalk of the corn. If you're familiar with corn production, quite often variety selection is done in the genetic phase of corn seed selection. They want to evaluate how the anchor roots are, how prevalent they are, and how well they establish and hold up the corn stalk. If you've got for example, if you've got a corn plant that produces a wonderful ear of corn, but it won't stand up because of the weight, it's not a very valuable to corn production. They can't harvest it. Talked with a young guy this morning. I'm going to purchase a little bit of corn from him this afternoon, but I went by and looked, and his corn is very upright, and he's got a good set of anchor roots, which enables him to mechanically harvest. If he had chosen a variety that didn't have good anchor roots, he wouldn't be able to run his combine through and mechanically harvest it. In times when I was growing up, we didn't have the good varieties that exist today. Quite often, someone would plant a crop of corn and it would have maybe 2 ears on a stalk. And we'd get some wind and a third of it would blow over. And that's a horrible thing to try to do. During those days, all the corn was hand harvested. So you had to physically go through and pull the ears off and throw it over the trailer. If it was all standing upright, it wasn't too bad. But if a third of it was laying over and you had to physically bend over and pick that up, that corn that was on the ground would get wet, it wouldn't dry out, it wouldn't keep, it would rot. And it was all because of this idea of the adventitious roots that are used to support this vertical stalk of corn. As we talk about the life cycle of the corn plant, this emerging plumule, in other words, the upright portion that's going to be developed into your corn stalk, it's protected by a structure that's called the coleoptile. And that's the area from which the main stem grows up through the soil. The true foliage begins to develop above this coleoptile when the stem goes through it, and it's a protective structure that is part of the actual plant, and it's part of the germination process. As we talk about the production of corn, does corn have a flower?
Yes, doesn't it? No?
I didn't hear. What'd you say?
Yes.
Okay. Tyler says yes somewhere. Where's the flower on a corn plant, Tyler?
I said as far as I'm aware, no.
Do what?
I said not as far as I'm aware.
All right. How does it produce seed if it doesn't have a flower?
Corn itself is the flower, isn't it?
No. The corn is the seed.
The cob itself? Is it?
I don't know. You're confusing me.
That's what I'm trying to do. Kyler. I'm trying to make you think.
Animal science, that's me.
I'm trying to, and it doesn't appear that it's on the top, not the April American.
The tassels are the male flowers, and the female flower is what produces the ear.
You're right. Right. The tassel is the utmost portion of that corn plant is where
You repeat,
the
literally.
pollen is originated, and that is the male portion of the flower of the corn plant. And as you said, the silk is the receptor of that pollen, so it's the female portion. Now, is there any correlation between the silk and the grain of the ear of corn? Is there any relevance to that?
Each of the silks goes to a kernel.
Exactly. And if you're in a situation where you've got heavy deer populations, the silks themselves, when they initially emerge and for 7 to 10 days after that, they are somewhat sweet. They're sticky. And the fact that they're sticky, that pollen that originates on the top of the corn plant in that tassel, it travels down by gravity or wind and adheres to that female portion or the silk. But if deer populations are really heavy, the deer like to graze on those silks because they're sweet. And if you've got a high deer population and they go through and nip all your silks off, what's going to happen? It's not going to die. It's not going to be very productive because you didn't have any receptors for the pollen. Does that make sense? But corn is an interesting crop in my eyes. Any of you grow sweet corn in your garden?
Yes, sir.
All right. Let's test your gardening ability. How do you plant your corn?
We usually take a 140 farm maul and make a hill, and we'll plant several rows together. Just on.
Okay. All right. You keyed my response when you said plant several rows together. I have witnessed a lot of folks that weren't really familiar with production of garden crops and corn in particular that will be limited for space, so they'll plant a single row of corn, then they'll come beside them with beans and tomatoes or peas or whatever. But generally, a single row of corn is not very productive because of the pollination that needs to occur to produce that ear of corn. If you can plant 2 or 3 or 4, however, multiple rows of corn, you've got a much greater likelihood of having a profitable or productive patch of corn because of the pollination. Single row, you don't have, that single plant, you don't have any interaction with other rows of corn. All right, assume that you planted a yellow variety of sweet corn in 3 rows along your garden, and in the next 3 rows you plant a white variety of sweet corn. What are you going to harvest?
I've never actually done it, but I've heard that you'll harvest bicolor.
You will harvest bicolor. Because of what factor?
Because of the cross-pollination?
Exactly, cross-pollination, exactly. And that's how that a lot of bicolor varieties, the initial bicolor varieties, were established, that they were done that way. Here, there have been, as I was growing up, Golden Queen was one of the best varieties that you could grow. And there were some people that liked Silver Queen. Golden Queen, a yellow variety, Silver Queen, a white variety. And, quite often there's some differences in families, and somebody likes white, somebody likes yellow, so they would plant some of both kinds, and they eventually ended up with a bicolor or mixed variety. So, same things happens with Indian corn. That's one of the reasons that you get so many different colors with Indian corn, because of the differences that are planted with that. So it's part of the pollination process that we deal with corn plants. Sweet corn is one of my favorite vegetables, and I've always got a special place for that. But when we're talking about this, the pistillate flower is on the ear corn, and the staminate flower is on the tassel. So that's where the staminate is the male flower and pistillate is the female flower. There's some pictures in your textbook, figure 6.3, that sort of exemplifies what we're talking about. All right, go ahead.
I was just going to say, while we're on cornflowers, I have a question. I've noticed often in sweet corn, for whatever reason, there will be a little bit of ear or a few kernels on the tassels. And I was wondering what causes that.
It's just a mutation. As for what causes it, I don't know. Some varieties are much more prone to that than others. And I don't know that there's any positive or negative effect from it. A plant geneticist might tell you that it has a detrimental effect, but from where I sit, I don't think it's a big deal. And I can't really answer what causes it, other than it's just one of those quirks of nature that we have. As you look at plants more and more, you'll find all sorts of things that are a little bit out of the norm. And I can't tell you why. I can make up a bunch of garble and tell you, but that's all it'll be with the garble. I'd rather be truthful and honest with you about that. I don't know. Yeah, it doesn't hurt anything, and you'll see little freakish things like that quite often. But it's and like I say, some varieties are more prone to it than others. I know exactly what you're speaking of. All right, any other corn questions? Okay, we're going to talk about the dicots next. They're dicotyledon. Have any of you ever placed some bean seed in a paper towel, moist paper towel, and let them swell and germinate?
We did that in biology class.
Tyler's done it. Okay. What kind of bean did you use? You know?
We use green bean.
Green bean. Okay. Okay. What happened?
We stuck it in a petri dish and just left it sitting on the windowsill for about a week, and after a little while, it started to sprout.
Okay.
Got little roots coming out of it.
Okay. That's what will happen. That's the reason I asked the question. In a normal bean production, if you put the bean seed into moist soil, you're going to see it begin to imbibe again. That's, take up moisture. It begins to swell, and it also has this radicle. This root, primary root is the first thing to emerge. And it's going to grow downward, and we'll talk about that another topic in a little bit. But that primary root begins to develop, and it'll also create some secondary roots. And if it's in a moist soil, you're going to have the hypocotyl to emerge. And that hypocotyl is a little stem that comes from the seed itself, the cotyledon, and it creates a little crook, a little elbow, for lack of a better way of describing it, and it's going to actually, that hypocotyl, as it begins to expand and grow, it's going to actually pull the cotyledons up out of the soil. The new seed leaves, it's going to have them emerge. And these cotyledons, the little seed, the seed pieces, the seed halves, are going to provide the nutrition and resources for all of this growth to take place. That's what their function is. That's why we eat beans, because of the protein and the nutrition that's there. And this nutrition will enable this plant or seed to begin to grow. And once those cotyledons emerge, you're going to have the apical meristem, which is the growing point for all plants, all green plants. And it's going to emerge from the center, in the middle between these two cotyledons. And that's going to be the first primary set of leaves. And this is what Caitlin was talking about. That's the primary leaf that emerges from a dicotyledon. And that is normally, in a case of a bean, it's going to be a trifoliate leaf. It's going to have 3 different components. And then it begins the vertical growth through the apical meristem. It's an interesting process, and that's why Tyler's biology class did it, to have a visual experience with what they're doing. But a meristem, as we talk about it, is a growing point. It's a point of cell division. And if we're talking about an apical meristem, that's one that's on the shoot, the apex, the upper portion of the growing point. Now, you'll also have shoot meristems, which will be on the tip of the root. But remember that a meristem is a point of cell division. It's where growth originates. It's where the growth, the cells emerge and divide and continue to do that. Roots elongate from a growing point. The shoots elongate from a growing point. And both of these growing points have particular characteristics that affect the plant growth. It talks about the cotyledons. Once they get the trifoliate leaves out and growing and emerging, they will actually shrivel and quite often abscise or drop off. They've done what they're supposed to do. They've got the plant from a dormant stage into a growth stage and perform their function, and they're no longer needed. So they'll shrivel up and just drop off. And you'll see them if you watch beans as they begin to grow. You'll notice what they've done. But once they drop off, the plant has reached a stage when it's gotten green leaves and it's able to manufacture its own food and continue the growth phase. So. Any of you familiar with the way that beans produce? We talked about corn, the pollination and the production of the corn, actual grains of corn. What happens in the case of the bean? How is it different than the corn? Is there a difference?
Beans produce more of what we would think of as a typical flour. Yep,
you're right. And that typical flour has definite parts, and it has the more customary function of a flour as compared to the corn. The corn's a little bit of a unique structure and the way that it functions. But you're correct in what you said about the bean has a normal flour structure. And they have what I think is a perfect flower. It doesn't require cross-pollination from insects. The wind will serve as the pollinator in there, just the general motion, and you'll get the cross-pollination in the flower of the bean, which will then begin the production of the bean pod and the actual embryos or the seed that will perpetuate the species as we talk about them. Have you ever thought about the differences in the types of beans that exist? The shapes, the different things that are involved with just being. The reason I bring this up, I've got at the little retail market that I've got, we've got about 20 different varieties of dried beans. Some of them are very similar. We've got, a navy bean, a great northern bean, a black bean, a pinto bean. They're all very similar structures. Then we'll have a large lima, a baby green lima, and a colored butter bean. They're a little different shape, but basically the same sort of structure. Then we got things like lentils. And that's a totally different critter in my eyes. I don't know much about the production of lentils. Do any of you know anything about lentils? I don't. They're used in soup, but that's about all I know about them. I don't know how they're produced. They're a real small, flat, structured thing, and like I said, I don't know anything about it. But as we talk about beans, there's a lot of different shapes, different morphologies, and different types of beans. We've got things like garbanzo beans. Are you familiar with garbanzo beans? There's a lot of them grown in Southside Virginia. But they're
chickpeas?
Yeah, chickpeas, exactly. That's what we're talking about with a garbanzo bean. It's a chickpea. What are chickpeas used for?
Hummus.
Hummus, right. There's a plant I think it's in Petersburg, that produces more hummus than any other plant, I think, in the United States. And they depend upon the chickpea production in Southside Virginia to provide that. There's a gentleman in Virginia State that's has done quite a bit of plant breeding with the production of chickpeas to increase the yields and viability of that industry that they have down there. Do you like hummus? Do any of you like hummus?
It's okay.
Tyler says it's okay. I don't care much for it. It's kind of flat and nasty in my eyes, but that's okay. I didn't grow up with hummus. There are certain groups of people that use hummus as a major component of their diet, but that didn't occur in Stewart, Virginia. So I have grown some chickpeas as a part of a research project from Virginia State. What did you start saying?
Oh, nothing.
Okay. We've covered monocots and dicots pretty well this morning. The next slide gets into talking about the cell, and we won't start on cells this morning. We're about out of time anyway. But if you guys, as you're moving along over the next few days, if you've got any questions about the plant science test that's coming up, new time is next Thursday, and I'll be glad to try to help you in any manner I can with that. But you got to ask me so I know how to help you. So let me know. I'm done.
Have a
Okay.
good weekend. See you Tuesday.